Thank you, everyone, for joining us for Presentation Skills for Subject Matter Experts, or as they are often referred to in the learning and development space as SMEs. The tagline for today's session is how to be clear and concise when your brain is absolutely full of data. And if you're in this room, your brain is probably full of data. So we'll go ahead and start talking through some best practices here. Before I do that, though, I do want to introduce my co-facilitator today, who's Dale Ludwig, our president and founder.
Hello, good to see you all.
And working with us as well today is Kevin Vogelsang, our Director of Operations, and he is no longer on video because he is performing the role of host, and he is going to be taking care of us and making sure that we have a favorable audio and video experience. So if you have any technical issues, go ahead and private message him through chat, and he'll work with you to fix whatever problem is taking place. So our agenda for the next hour is we're going to work through some guiding principles of effective business communication. These guiding principles apply to anybody who communicates in business. And if you're here, that would be you. We're going to talk about ways of getting your head together when your head is so full of data. And then what do you do with that information and put it into a formula where you can set context for your audience so they are more familiar with what you're trying to accomplish. And then we'll spend the rest of our time talking through tools, techniques, and insights to make it easy both for you, the speaker, and for the audience members who you are working with. Now, here is an image of your brain. Here is your brain on data. I love this metaphor because, we've all looked at piles and piles and piles of Legos on the floor. Hopefully you haven't stepped on one, but if you have, you know how much that can hurt. It doesn't hurt quite so much in the brain, but all of that data, all of those Legos are rolling around in your brain, which is why it makes it so difficult to make sense of things. So I did a little bit of research and I came across this woman named Wendy Castillo, and she is, among many other things, she's a graphic designer. And she said, when we take a look at data, it's like this pile of Legos, and our job as communicators is ultimately to make sense of it. So the first step in order to do that is to sort the information. So here you can see on the second graphic going down, she's put everything into piles of colors, but it's still quite messy. So then in order to make it palatable for people, we need to present it visually in some way, which she has done here and stacked up those colors. But even that isn't enough because we have to make that information useful to our audience members. So the bottom part of this graphic, you can see she's making it useful by actually creating a picture of what can be. So if we apply this concept to developing and delivering a presentation, we can see that by sorting the data and presenting it visually, that's all about the preparation. And then when we get into the actual presentation is when we make it useful and paint the picture for everybody who's listening to us. Now, a little bit about us before we move forward. I see several familiar faces in today's session and familiar names. So thank you for those of you who know us, who have joined us, but a lot of you are new to us. So Turpin Communication, the work that we do, we are communication consultants and trainers. We work with presenters, meeting facilitators, and trainers to help them be more effective and efficient when they are communicating in business. Now, Dale and I have been working together for almost 30 years. Turpin Communication is 30-some years. I always forget the math.
32.
Thank you, Dale, 32 years. Congratulations on that, by the way. But over the years, Dale and I have co-authored a handful of books, 3 of which are down here. The Orderly Conversation, Dale's going to talk about that concept in a moment. The Virtual Orderly Conversation, which you will get free access to a little bit later. And we also wrote a book called Effective SMEs, so you are in good hands with us. Now, as a business communicator, regardless of where you are on the corporate ladder and regardless of where you are globally and what industry, you wear 2 hats. The first hat is the expert hat. This is a very comfortable hat. You've developed how to wear this hat over the years, and it looks pretty snazzy on you. So when you are the expert, it's about understanding the data, examining all of those details, amassing know-how, and gaining expertise over time. But that alone, as you all know, isn't enough. You also have to be a communicator, which means you need to find ways to set context for your listeners, be clear, Communicate in a way that relates with them, seek to be understood, share your own stories, and ultimately aid your audience members in some form of decision making, because generally speaking, that's what you are asking them to do. Sometimes that decision is small, sometimes it is really big. Regardless, you as a business communicator need to feel comfortable wearing both the expert and the communicator hat. Now, if we take a look at this graphic, this bluish oval represents everything you know, but what your audience needs is this itty bitty piece. That's a very difficult thing to get your arms around when you are an expert, because from your perspective, it feels like everything is important. And while it is, all of that information isn't necessarily important to the people that you are talking with. So you need to find ways to simplify that information. So let me ask you this. As a SME, a subject matter expert, what communication challenges do you face? Go ahead and drop your answer into chat. And by the way, when I look over here, it's just that I'm working with two monitors and I have your videos moved over here. The challenges that you face. We've got Savannah saying time.
Yep.
I'm guessing, Savannah, that means time to get yourself prepared and time to actually deliver the information. It takes a lot of time. This has been said that Mark Twain wrote it, although I'm not really sure that's true. I think a lot of things are given attribute to him. But anyway, somebody said, I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one instead. I think that is very much one of the challenges that we all face. We have people don't listen. Oh gosh, they're really coming in now, aren't they?
Yeah, there are a lot.
Let's see if I can read through all of these. Figuring out the minimum data the audience needs while still trying to demonstrate my expertise. Yeah, because Jason, it can feel sometimes as if you're not demonstrating your expertise if you leave some of the sausage making out. People don't want the sausage making, right? You want the sausage. I'm mixing metaphors like crazy, which is something that I tend to do. Making it clear for everyone who might use it, yet making assumptions about the level of the audience. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, making those assumptions, because you have to make some assumptions. So Dale, let's get at those guiding principles, shall we?
Yes, let me bring up my slides here. I'm going to take the next two pieces of the agenda here. The first one is going to focus on very big picture stuff, guiding principles for business communication in general, but which apply obviously to the situations that you all face as SMEs. When Greg is talking about the books that we've written, their focus is on redefining or defining exactly what needs to happen in various types of communication situations. And this continuum is going to help me explain what we mean by that. Because when you look at these, let's talk about communication that happens at work. There is a range from very informal interactions to very formal interactions. Most of the time, on the formal end, as you'll see here, the conversations are just chance encounters, but the formal stuff is a speech or like a TED talk. And those are pretty rare for most of us. I mean, I've never done a TED talk, and it's been years since I've delivered what I would consider to be a speech to a large group of people. But here's where we are. We're between these two extremes on the continuum. And in this middle section here, we have orderly conversations, meaning that they share characteristics with both the chance encounter conversation on the left and the more formal situations on the right. And there are lots of different types of orderly conversations. As you can see with these images, we've got virtual meetings, hybrid meetings, face-to-face, one-on-ones, one-to-group, standing, seated. All of these situations are both prepared and conversational in nature. So the tension between those two things is really important. But the thing to remember is that those are the things, that type of communication is what we all do to get business done. They are planned, they're structured, they're responsive, and they're interactive. And that group of characteristics pretty much explains why these things are so challenging, especially for a subject matter expert. When we look at this in a little more detail, on the with these two circles, we can see that the orderly side is all about prep and accuracy and structure. And many of you mentioned those issues in chat just a minute ago. On the other side, though, these need to be conversations, which means there needs to be a level of engagement, level of spontaneity that the audience needs to sense and that you are in control of, and they need to be interactive. Now, these things obviously are going, these two sets of characteristics obviously compete with each other, because the question you might have is, how do I prepare to be spontaneous? And we can answer that question, but it really demands that we fully understand what needs to happen in any given situation. Because what happens during the prep process, as you're preparing, as you move from the orderly to the conversation, it's about looking ahead to the uncertainties. And that might drive you crazy as a SME, because if you have in your head exactly what you want to cover, and you get into the conversation, you get into the meeting, and suddenly that's not what people want to hear, that's going to throw you off. It would throw anybody off. But I think the stakes go up the more you know. That leadership comment about leadership doesn't understand, doesn't even have the basics of what I'm talking about. That's the issue that this process focuses on. How do you anticipate those unforeseen levels of confusion or questions or issues with your audience? But then as your meeting is going on, or as your presentation is going forward, you're constantly adapting what was planned to what's happening in the moment. And that too doesn't feel good. You'll notice there's kind of a theme that's going to go through what I'm talking about here for a bit, in that you have to do things that don't feel comfortable or don't feel right, because so much of what you do depends on what you know. And when you start to communicate something to people, you don't get to talk about everything that you know. Your success is not determined by communicating everything that you know. And that is a bitter pill to swallow sometimes. So the thing to remember is that success occurs through the conversation. It does not happen by perfect preparation. It doesn't happen because you've memorized your presentation. It happens in the moment with the people that you're communicating with. That brings us to this slide. Business communicators succeed on two levels. This goes back, well, let me just go through these and you'll see the connection between the previous slides and this. First, on the left-hand side, we have the plan. The goal for your presentation is to achieve your goal. Obviously, you want to make sure that they, as the examples here show, buy, agree, align, learn, whatever it happens to be. You want to get them from point A to point B through your presentation. And that requires managing the process, managing the conversation as it goes forward. And when you do that, you create the conditions for a fruitful discussion, earn trust and goodwill, make it easy for them, nurture relationships over time, and you manage the give and take that happens. Now that, achieving that second level, the process level, means giving up a lot of the control that you might want to have over the conversation. Because as you can see, all of these things focus on your audience, focus on the individuals that you are communicating with. A fruitful discussion sounds sort of lofty or soft, but actually it's incredibly important, because you want to get these people into the conversation that you're having with them and make sure you're meeting their needs. And of course, I'm going to talk later about making it easy for them. How do you do that? What do you do proactively to make sure they're with you? What you have to sacrifice in your own approach and your own thinking to be clear with them? So I think it's important to realize that most of the time you're not going to reach your goal. You're not going to, the plan won't work if you don't manage the process effectively. So it's all about, notice how much difference there is between the content you're delivering and this list of things on the process side. It's a way to manage. You have to manage how you communicate with folks in a way that makes what you have to say understandable and relevant and interesting. So let's talk about how you do that. Let's talk about what you need to do to get your head together before, thank you, Greg, before your presentation. How do you plan for it? So let's move on to the next. Greg just took over control of my slides, everybody, not because he's a control freak, because it's going to make this whole process run a bit smoother.
Well, to be honest, I might be a control freak, but
he is a
it's
control
not why
freak. Yes, it was his decision that he was going to do this when we were going through the dry run yesterday. Anyway, the image you're seeing here is what we call the framing strategy worksheet. And the pages, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, although march back across the slide here. It's a fairly short document, but it does help you get your head together, get the plan going before your presentation. So you'd like to go to the next one, Greg?
Yeah. So we
Greg's going to
thought
talk
what
about
we
the
would
example.
we
Sorry.
thought what we would do is create a little bit of a case study here and actually show you how to get your arms around developing a presentation. So the story we'll work with is that I am an analyst in R&D, so research and development at a food manufacturing company. So if you can imagine opening up your pantry door in your kitchen and there's some food in there, I work for one of those companies in research and development. I'm an analyst though, and I work with data from a variety of different areas: scientific research, market research, and manufacturing capability. And for this story, some recent supply chain issues have bubbled up here at the company, and I'm working closely with a guy named Glenn, our vendor relations manager. So that is the story that we'll be working with as we work through this tool. And I might mention that Kevin is going to drop a link to this tool into chat a little bit later. He's going to wait though, because we want you focused on how we use the tool, then we'll give you access to it. So Dale.
It's all about control. It's all about control. Okay. The first step here, as you can see, is to identify your goal for the presentation. And this seems like an easy thing to do, but the more technical you are, the harder you have to work to move away from just, well, I'm going to deliver this data, I'm going to deliver this information. So let's look at the process here on the left-hand side. You want to finish this sentence at the end of my presentation. I want my audience to do, think, or feel. And many times the feeling one is really important because you may want, for example, to have them feel comfortable with the information that you've delivered. They don't need to fully understand it, but they might need to just feel comfortable with it and trust you, what you've had to say about it. As you can see on the right here, we break it down into persuasive presentations and informative presentations, slight differences there. At the very bottom, I want to draw your attention to those highlighted words. So it's better that they buy, accept, believe, thank you, agree to, or accept the usefulness of the information that you are presenting. So this helps you move away from a data-focused presentation to one that is actually designed to get them to change their view of it or change their way of thinking. So you want to be specific here, and many times this is a stumbling block for SMEs when we're working with them because they really want to focus on just understanding the data, and you want more than that. You want them to have a feeling about it, have an attitude about it, do something with it. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Or no, you're going to do an example, aren't you? Sorry.
Yeah, so if we work through our case study here, our little scenario, what I want for my goal for my presentation is for my audience to be comfortable making a decision. So the comfort is the feeling part. The making a decision is the do part. Both of those are quite important here. And the decision is, are we going to go or no go with product X that we are developing in R&D? Now let's move to step 2, which is
Okay, this
assessing
one,
your audience.
assessing your audience, this focuses on who they are, what they know, what they need from you. And there are a lot of questions here that I'm not going to go through all of them. You're going to get this document to look at for yourself. But it's all, for example, on the left-hand side, are there key people in the audience? Someone mentioned, that you have a mixed group of audience members. How do you adapt to those people to various levels? And for some of them, your information will be much more useful than it is for others. Being aware of that is really helpful. So who are the key people? What are their pain points? Are they going to be difficult to persuade? All of these ideas help you take a step back to think about these folks apart from the information that you're going to be delivering from them, looking at them as individuals, looking at them as a group, and thinking about how they will respond to your presentation. So Greg, you've chosen a few of these to answer for your audience.
Yeah. So the first question there is, what is their relationship to me? And they are all leaders and decision makers. And I do have a key person in my audience. Her name is Virginia. She is the most senior leader. So as I'm thinking this through, what does this mean for me? Well, I need to make sure that Virginia is very comfortable with the information I'm using, and she may be the most important person in the room. That doesn't mean that I ought to ignore everyone else, but I just need to keep my eyes on Virginia and making sure that she is with me throughout the presentation. Pain point, as I mentioned earlier, are these vendors. So we've got these supply chain issues. The vendors are not coming through. So that is something that is going to have to be dealt with in my presentation. Now, how much do they care about my goal? A lot. It's a big deal. They want to be first to market, and the heat is on for this presentation. But are they going to be difficult to persuade? No. So it's not so much a sales job as I just need to give them exactly the information they need to make a decision.
So thinking about the audience in this way, really getting your head around who's in the room and accepting whatever perspective they may have, helps you determine the level of detail you want to cover, what to leave in and what to take out, degree of persuasion you want to focus on, the order of the agenda, that's an important one, and you want to uncover cultural considerations. So this is a good way for you to take the big picture into account and think about what do they think about this information I'm delivering them? How much do they actually need and how much do they not need? And that, because it's always about cutting back, cutting back, cutting back, stepping back all the way through. Okay, next slide, please, Craig. The next step is to consider their current situation. And this is about, in some ways it's big picture stuff, but in many ways it's much more specific. It's what is their attitude, what's their perspective when they walk in the room or turn on the Teams meeting right before your presentation starts. So as you can see, the sentence you're finishing here is my audience's current situation is. On the right, there's some guidelines there for persuasive presentations. Thank you, Greg. Um, Often what you're doing is solving a problem. So a retail wants to increase sales or market share. Process isn't working. It's frustrating everybody. It's the reason you're delivering the data that you're delivering. With informative presentations, it's a little bit different in that you need to focus on, well, as it says here, the current situation states the fact that the group needs the information that you're presenting. Because many times, if you said in chat they don't listen to me, maybe it's because you haven't given them enough of a reason to care about the information, or maybe you're giving them too much information. So the current situation, when you're informing, is you need to know this for some particular reason. It also can be, as it says there, the state of mind that they walk in the room with. They well, everybody's busy, everybody's distracted, everybody has something else on their mind before your presentation starts. So sometimes acknowledging that is an important step with the current situation. What do you have for your example, Greg?
Yeah, so in this particular situation, the audience's current situation is that they have a desire to be first in market. So expediency is important here. And they are concerned about the history with certain vendors in the supply chain. So we've got a push-pull here. They want this thing to go, but they have reservations about the team members that can make this happen. So let's bring that up. I now go to step 4, organizing the agenda.
Organizing your agenda. I mentioned before that your analysis of the audience can help you organize the agenda, and I'll get into those details in a second. But on the left, list the information they need to hear from you. Given what you know so far, given what their current situation is, what do they need? List it out. That's what you're going to cover in your presentation, or not cover in your presentation, because it doesn't meet their needs, or it's not an important thing for them to know. So think about how you would break down all of that information. And then on the right, take a look at the,
Sorry, Dale.
oh, that's okay.
I got excited.
Sometimes your data, the information you're presenting as a SME must follow a logical order. Whatever that logic is, that's fine, cover it in that way. Other times, though, it doesn't have to be covered in that way. Then take a look at who your audience is and think about what's most important for them. Start with that. Start with the most important thing, then go to the second and third and fourth. That might be counterintuitive for you because you might want to lead your way up to the most important thing, but try to fight that. We'll talk about it more in a bit, because what you really want is to get their attention and keep it, not keep them in suspense and make them work too hard to get them where you want them to go. So let's hear your example, Greg.
Sure. So in my agenda, there are going to be 4 items. First, we're going to recommend that they go. So even though I said earlier that part of the goal was to get them to go or no go, I'm going in with a recommendation, right? That's an important piece. They want to know how I think about this information. So my recommendation, let's go with this. Now, in order to convince them of that, I need to be a little bit persuasive around Glenn and the new vendor agreement. So Glenn, one of my coworkers, is going to step in and deliver some information about what he's been up to about making sure the vendors are in line. Then we'll take a look at new market research and review consumer demand. And then I'm going to bring in Inez, one of my colleagues, to talk through the manufacturing capability. So as a subject matter expert, I'm not an expert in the manufacturing capability. So I'm going to bring in help, Inez, to help me deliver that. And that then brings us to the final step, which is identifying benefits to your audience.
Yeah, this one, obviously, the question you answer is what will your audience gain from your presentation? Don't skip this step. It's not necessarily intuitive to cover it, but think about how their work life is better when you're finished with your presentation. What are you giving them? And if it's simply comfort with the information that you're presenting, perfectly fine benefit statement would be, I hope that when I'm finished today, you walk away with your questions answered and you're feeling better about the data that I've presented. Perfectly good benefit, because it also says to them, you don't have to understand everything I say, but I want you to be able to use the information to do your job better. And on the right-hand side, you can see that we break it down again with persuasive presentations and informative presentations. Let's look at the informative one, the 3 bullet points there. Informed enough to make a decision. Thank you, Greg. Clear up confusion, know how to function after the reorganization. Those are all pretty day-to-day sorts of things. But when you make a statement that says, here's what I hope you walk away with, it helps them know how to listen to what you're saying. Because if there's a huge divide between your expertise and them, they may not even know how to listen. They may not even know what they're listening for. And if you could do a good job of saying, okay, here's all I always use throw that word in there. Here's all you need to know. It's not a big deal. Just understand this part, and I'll worry about the details. But for you, here's what your concern is. Doing that is a favor to your listeners, and it helps you be more persuasive with them because they'll know how their thinking is supposed to shift. Okay, good. Go ahead with your example.
Before I do that, I want to mention that Mark has put into chat that it's more about them than it is about me. Absolutely. And when you do make it about them, it actually folds back on itself and it does become about you because you become then the hero who is going to be the go-to person for helping people make decisions, right? So it's career building when you are able to deliver a clear data-heavy presentation. So back to the example here, the way Bill?
Sorry, I was just responding to Forrest's comment here. I think step 5 is key. Need the vision of the takeaway to successfully present, and that is absolutely true.
Yep, and we need to
Thanks.
make that clear right away, and we're going to show you a tool to help you do that here in a second. But the benefits for my audience is they're going to be able to make the decision, they're going to be comfortable with it, and they'll be able to set next steps. All right. So let's get into how do we use that information now? All of that brain work that we did, how do we make it actionable so that we can actually put the presentation in the context of the work to be done? So here we have the next page in the framing strategy worksheet, the document that we've been working through. We have 4 sticky notes here, and they are labeled audience's current situation, presentation goal, agenda, and benefits. Guess what? That should look really familiar because we already did the brain work in the tool. Now we just need to simplify it into tiny little sticky notes. So here is the example. Just again, moving all this data over from what we've already done. The audience's current situation is that they have a desire to be first in the market and they have supply chain concerns. Goal is to help them make a decision on product X. The agenda, I've already explained what I'm going to talk about to you. And then the benefits are the comfort moving forward and able to set next steps. So now I've got that information on my stickies. Now, keep in mind, I don't have a script. all I have are keywords here, and that's really important because one of the guiding principles that Dale talked about earlier was your responsibility to facilitate an orderly conversation. If you script yourself or get so detailed here, it puts you into your head. What we want here are keywords, so that will open you up to the conversation. So let me show you how this will work. I delivering the presentation. You all are my team members. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining me. As we all know, we have a desire to be first in market with product X. However, we also know that we've been experiencing some supply chain concerns. So my goal for today is to lay out the information and help you make a decision on this product X. So we're going to talk through my recommendation, which foreshadowing here is that we go. I'm going to ask Glenn to come in and allay some of our concerns around the new vendor agreements. Then I want to talk through the market research and review some consumer demand that we've uncovered. And finally, I've asked Inez to come in and talk with us about the manufacturing capability. At the end of the day, I want to make sure that you all are comfortable moving forward so that we're able to set those next steps. So what have we done here? We've answered two very important questions. What are we talking about? And why? Now, in this example, it took me about 45 seconds to frame up this conversation. So I'm clearing away the clutter and I'm bringing the meeting to order, right? I'm formalizing the conversation and I'm helping people understand where are we going in the next 15 minutes, half hour, however long the presentation is. Now let's take a look at another example. We're going to leave that other example alone. We'll move into now a marketing analytics presentation. So let's say that I'm a data analyst and we've got some website issues that leadership has asked me to look into because we need to improve our results for our website. So the audience current situation here, again, you are the leaders that I'm working with. Everybody, thank you for joining me for today. As we all know, our organic website traffic is trending down. The competition, as we all know, is getting higher research results than we are, and that leads us all to a real fear of losing market share. So I put together this presentation, one, to help us understand why this is happening, but more importantly, lay out a path forward for success. So the agenda, we're going to talk through three things. First, I'll show you what's happening with the analytics. Then I will walk you through two options for combating the competition. The first option is really diving into organic SEO and keyword rewrites. And then we'll take a look at paid ads. Finally, we will take a look at maximizing the existing traffic that we have. Benefit here is we need to maintain market share. So let's keep going. So there again, I was able to answer two important questions. What are we talking about and why? Now, let's take a look at yet another example. Let's
Greg,
say,
sorry to interrupt.
Greg,
Somebody has their hand up. If you want to
Forrest
address their question.
oh, yeah, thank you. I didn't see that. Forrest, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to understand. So these four stickies are just like that's the intro you're giving us examples of, correct?
That's right. Think of
So
it
you just
as
want to
the
make a border around it. Go ahead.
Exactly. You're kind of creating a scaffolding for the rest of the conversation to hang on.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So let's show you a scaffolding for another example, which is, let's say that I am responsible for delivering software demos, and this is a support issue. So I might go into this particular conversation. And by the way, Shane is one of my coworkers, and the buyer here has been working with Shane. So as you know, you've been working with Shane, and you have some questions, legitimate questions around third-party integrations and cybersecurity. So my goal for today's conversation is to answer all the questions that you may have and put your mind at ease. The reason we're doing this is I want you to truly feel comfortable moving forward with Shane and then get yourself ready for the data migration. So I'll talk through three quick things. First, an acclimation to the interface. Second, I'll show you the API administration backend, and then we'll work through those security measures. So again, I've answered the questions, what are we talking about and why? Now, you may have noticed that I went in a slightly different order. I went completely, clockwise here. The reason I did that is to demonstrate that there is no magic way to handle all 4 of these stickies. The idea is to do whatever seems to work for you. Now, we talked about the Legos and the data. Remember, all you know about the topic, that is not your job. Your job is to simplify as you move through the presentation. And you want to be able to set context by leading with your point. Now, the frame that I just walked you through, that's the big point. And then the rest of the presentation serves that main point. But the leading point might also be a thesis statement, a recommendation. Maybe it's the short answer to a question that has been asked. And then as it shows here on the right-hand side, it's your job to make a decision or not to go into more detail as you move forward. Now that brings us to our final agenda point, which is now you've got your head around what you need to do. Those were the first few steps of the framing strategy. Now we've got the frame that helps you understand what those first few moments are going to be like. Now we have to deliver the rest of the content, making it easy for both you and them. And that's where I'm going to stop sharing and let Dale finish things up today.
Okay, I'm going to bring together several ideas and offer a couple of new ones in this section, because really it's all about, as we said before, making it easy for your audience to understand what you're saying and what you're talking about and what you want them to do. And making it easy for them is very difficult for you. So as I said before, some things feel really awkward. Get used to that feeling, because it's simply a reaction to the adaptation you need to make to the people you're talking to. So what does making it easy mean? It means these 4 things: understanding your objective and what they need from you. It means leading with your point. It means simplifying content and reducing cognitive load, which I will define in a second. Okay, we talked about the framing strategy as a way to understand what your objective is and what they need from you. That's the tool that you can use to really separate yourself from that. Leading with your point is also really counterintuitive for lots of folks, but really helpful for the people that you're talking to, because it helps them. They don't have to work so hard as you move through data, and then state your point. Because as you're moving through all the data, they don't quite have the context that they need for it. And so give them your point first and then support it. It'll help you be more concise, and it'll help them follow along. Greg has mentioned this a couple of times. It's really important. It hurts a lot to take things out that you know so well, but you need to if you're going to communicate well. And you also want to think, this is a new idea, think about parallel bullets. When you're using bullet points, make them be parallel in structure. As you can see here, each one of those points starts with a verb. That seems like a minor change, but it does 2 things. One, much easier to deliver the bullets from your perspective. Also easier for them to understand them, because it makes them all fit within an overall argument. Cognitive load. Let me just read this definition here. Cognitive load is the amount of working memory being used, like RAM in your computer, only for the human brain. When memory usage on your computer is high, the system starts to slow down. It doesn't function as efficiently. The same thing happens with learning. In other words, don't overload people, because they won't be able to sort through what you're talking about. The APA defines cognitive load in this way: the relative demand imposed by a particular task in terms of mental resources required. It's also called mental load. So this doesn't mean that you have to overly simplify things for people. It doesn't mean that you can't go into, if they need the level of detail that you're familiar with, go into it, but make it digestible for them. And I think here's a really good example of how we deal with cognitive load all the time. This is a screenshot taken from some CNN show. Apparently, I don't know who Brooke Baldwin is, but apparently that's her. But what's happening in this image that we're seeing is we've got, number one, it's Brooke's last day. That's one image. Down at the bottom, we've got what's happening with Facebook. And then over here on the right, we have information about the stock market. This is a great example of too much going on one slide. I mean, obviously, television shows, news programs do this all the time, because you might only be interested in one of these bits of information. But to expect you to take all of this in at once would be impossible. So you'd have to really work hard to take it all in. And it's a really good comparison with texting and driving. You might think, yeah, I can do this quick text as I'm driving down the road, but you really can't because your focus is going to go either to driving or to the text. You cannot do both. So it's just very similar to this well-known example of how to control where your attention's going. So how do you reduce cognitive load? Two big ideas. You simplify content and you treat slides as show and tell. So as it says there under the first one, you want to simplify it for your benefit and for the audience's benefit as well, because you don't want to have so much to think about yourself that it's hard to sort through what needs to be communicated to your audience. Here's what we mean by treat your slides like show and tell. Okay, first, make your slides part of the conversation. They are not something that exists outside of it. In other words, it's your job when you're delivering a slide to say to your audience, here's a slide that shows X. Let's look at how this slide is laid out so that you can understand what it means. It's not about projecting something on a screen while you talk about that same something in a different sort of way, because what you're asking them to do is read and listen, and they can't do that. So you want to read, and yes, you do want to read bullet points to folks to help control where their attention is going and to slow down the information reception to a level that's appropriate for them. So think about that show and tell thing. You want to control where people look. In other words, as you can see in that image there on the right, she's pointing to her slide. Maybe she's saying, look at that blue piece of the pie. The just saying that, even though it's maybe that blue piece of the pie is labeled and it's as clear as day, doesn't matter. You still want to tell them where to look just because making it easier for them to take in the information. Now, this happens both in person and virtually. You want to point, add animation as we're doing here on this slide, and use descriptive language, as I just said. So think about why doesn't this always happen? I think the reason this doesn't happen is because you get so wrapped up in the details that you forget about the fact that they're seeing that slide for the first time, and they need a little help in figuring out what's important about it. And this includes saying things like, you see those bullets over on the right, skip them. You don't even need to look at them later. Right now, I want to focus on this image on the left. That really helps people know, okay, gives them permission to ignore something to focus where you want their attention to go. Zoom in using the magnifying tool. And there's another way to do this too, Greg. I think I forgot how to do it, but down here, there's a little magnifying glass. I can zoom in wherever I want to go on this slide to make it bigger, more readable. And I think if we do the plus, yes, if I use the plus sign, the plus key, I can also enlarge, and the minus takes back down my slides. Whoop, too far. That's okay. I'll bring that back up. Finally, craft useful slide titles. This seems really simple and unnecessary for some of you probably, but think about how the slide title could help you and your audience understand what you're saying. Here's an example that comes from our book. It's about a guy named Luis. He's high energy, disorganized, in his head, forgetful. There's a lot going on with him to increase his cognitive load. So for his benefit, we would recommend changing this slide title, which simply says gross sales. And obviously it's a bar chart that goes from January to October, each bar getting a little bit color in the graph. So that slide title might describe what this data is, but it doesn't talk about what the data means. This one does. Month-over-month sales growth. If Luis is talking to a group of investors, for example, he wants to get some money from them to keep the business going, he may want to emphasize the fact that things have been going very well over the past few months. He may also want to use something that we call a trigger, simple things like put an oval, but it encompasses those two bars between April and May because that's where the big bump was. Maybe there's a story, talk about why that success occurred and how it can be repeated. So what happened here is an interesting story, let me tell you. This is a way to help the listeners, the investors, follow along with Luis, but it's also a way for him to remember what he's trying to say. Because as you know, he tends to be forgetful and his brain is going 1,000 miles an hour, and he really has a hard time staying close to what the data actually is on the screen. Finally, create clear labels. I like this example because we have a processing model here that I'm not going to go into. But as you can see, the labels are on the model itself, as opposed to the one here on the right, where the labeling is below in a box and sort of a key at the bottom of the slide. That one is much harder to understand than the one on the left. This comes from Mind Tools. A labeled diagram places a lower demand on working memory than one that has labels listed on the slide. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my reading. But it's easier to create the one on the right for you, much easier to explain and understand on the left for your audience during your presentation. So think about not only what the data is that you're putting on your slides, but also how are they going to look at it? How can you help them understand exactly what you mean with the image that you're showing them? I believe this goes to you, Greg.
Sure does. So I will share my slides and wrap things up today. So there are scads and scads of best practices that we could have talked about to help subject matter experts simplify the information so that they can be clear and concise and compelling in a presentation. We only had enough time to go through just a few, but I hope the ones that we did go through help you understand that everything that you are that comes together to make you the expert that you are is really, really good, but not everybody needs to know all that information. They only need to know what they need to make the decision. So I hope we've been able to help you understand how you wear these two hats when you are communicating with people. Now, we also took a look at this data, this graphic right here, where we take everything from data all the way down to making it useful for your listeners. We also talked about the fact that you are going in to facilitate an orderly conversation, and that's different from a speech, and it's not about writing a dissertation. It's about being clear and concise with your verbal communication, again, to help people make a decision. So as a reminder, we help people be more effective and efficient when presenting, leading meetings, and facilitating training. So thank you very much for joining us today. Our very last best practice is end your meetings early. You know, we talked earlier about starting a little bit late because you want to give people enough time to get into the meeting space, whether it's live or virtual. We can have a conversation around whether culturally that's correct or not. But if the right people aren't in the room and you start with the meeting, you're going to have to backtrack anyway. So you might as well give people time to get into the room. Final thing is end your meetings early so they have a better time, an easier time getting into the next meeting. So maybe it doesn't start as late as yours did. So thank you all very much for today's discussion.